You've been performing for so long, you forgot who you were before the applause. You don't need a new identity. You need to come home to the one you abandoned. It's time to change the narrative. It's time to recognize who you are. You are not an imposter. You are not a mistake. You are not a placeholder in your own life. We spend a lot of time in these conversations talking about the internal experience of imposter feelings, the self-doubt, the fear of being found out, the quiet voice that tells you that you do not belong where you are standing. And all of that is real and it deserves the attention we give it. But today I want to turn the lens outward for a moment because the truth is that for many of us, those feelings did not generate themselves. They were planted, they were cultivated, they were carefully and deliberately placed inside of us by people who looked at who we were becoming and made a very calculated decision to make us doubt ourselves before we could fully realize what we carried. Today's episode is It's about identity, not incompetence. Let us be honest about something that does not get said enough in conversations about the imposter phenomenon. Not every feeling of inadequacy you have ever experienced came from your own insecurity. Some of it came from real people in real rooms, in real relationships who saw something in you that unsettled them. People who recognized, perhaps even before you did, that you carried a blueprint for something far greater than the space they had assigned to you. And rather than celebrate that, rather than pour into it, they chose to do something else entirely. They chose to make you question it. They leaned into the narrative that you were not ready, not qualified, not the right fit. Not because the evidence supported that conclusion, but because the evidence threatened them. What they called your incompetence was never really about your ability. It was always about your identity and the power that identity held. Think about the people in your life who have been the loudest voices of doubt, the ones who questioned your decisions when you tried to elevate, the ones who subtly reminded you of where you came from whenever you dared to reach for something beyond it, the ones who introduced a note of skepticism every time you expressed confidence and who seemed most comfortable with you when you were smallest. I want you to sit with this question. What if their doubt was never really about you? What if it was about them? What if the version of you that was expanding, that was growing into rooms they had not been invited into, that was accessing opportunities and possibilities that exceeded the boundaries they had placed around your potential? What if that version of you was not their problem to solve, but their threat to manage? Because there is a significant difference between someone who doubts you because they genuinely cannot see your potential and someone who doubts you precisely because they can. There is a particular kind of person who recognizes greatness in someone else and responds to it not with encouragement, but with erosion. They are not always loud about it. In fact, the most effective ones are remarkably subtle. They do it through comparison, always finding someone else who is doing it better, further along, more polished. They do it through the well-timed question that plants seeds of uncertainty right before a pivotal moment. They do it through the praise that always arrives with a qualifier, the support that always comes with a condition, the encouragement that somehow manages to leave you feeling smaller than before they spoke. And over time, if you are not careful, you begin to internalize their narrative as your own truth. You begin to repeat their doubts in your own voice. You start waking up in the morning with questions that were not originally yours, wondering if you are as capable as you thought, if your success was real, if your place at the table is deserved, and the person who first whispered those questions into the atmosphere of your life has moved on, completely unaware of the damage they left behind, or worse, entirely aware and entirely satisfied with it. Here's the thing about a blueprint. The people who are only working from a blueprint themselves, the people who are operating within the limits of what has been handed to them, can feel it when someone else is building from original design. There is a frequency to originality. There is a quality to someone who is not just following a path that already exists, but laying down something new. And that quality can be deeply threatening to people who have built their entire sense of security on the assumption that the order of things is fixed, that certain people belong in certain places, and that the architecture of success is not meant to be redesigned by someone like you. When you show up as someone who did not get the memo about your limitations, when you walk in with a vision that exceeds what the room was prepared to contain, you disrupt the order. And disruption, for people whose identity depends on that order remaining intact, is an emergency. So they move to contain you, not always consciously, not always with full awareness of what they are doing or why, but the effect is the same. They begin to build a case sometimes in rooms you are not in, sometimes directly to your face for why you are not quite ready, not quite the right fit, not quite as exceptional as you might believe yourself to be. And they use the language of concern. They frame it as honesty. They dress it up as feedback, as mentorship, as realistic guidance meant to protect you from the embarrassment of reaching too far. But what they are really doing is writing a ceiling into your story, a ceiling low enough that they never have to look up at you. And the most dangerous part of it is not what they say in the open. It is what you begin to say to yourself in private. Once their voice has found a home in the architecture of your thinking, this is exactly where the imposter phenomenon takes root in so many people's lives, not in genuine incompetence, because again, the data does not support that. It takes root in the accumulated weight of other people's fear disguised as assessment. It takes root in the gap between who you know yourself to be on your best and most honest days and the distorted image that has been reflected back to you by people who needed you to stay within the boundaries of their comfort. When you have been told often enough, in enough different ways, by enough people, in enough positions of influence that you are not quite measuring up, even when the evidence says otherwise, the mind begins to build a case that confirms what it has repeatedly heard. It is not weakness. It is the way human beings are wired. We are meaning-making creatures, and when we are surrounded by a particular meaning long enough, we begin to make it our own. But here is what I need you to understand, and I need you to receive this fully. The fact that they targeted you is the testimony. The fact that they felt compelled to chip away at your confidence, to undercut your credibility, to introduce doubt into the story you were writing about yourself, that is not evidence of your inadequacy. That is evidence of your power. You do not waste energy trying to shrink something that is not a threat. You do not mobilize doubt against someone whose potential you genuinely cannot see. The deliberateness of the effort to make you feel less than is in itself a confirmation of what they recognized in you. They saw the blueprint. They understood what it would produce if left alone, and they made a choice to tamper with the foundation before the building could rise high enough to change the entire landscape around it. Think about the moments in your life where you were closest to a breakthrough and the opposition was loudest. Think about the seasons where you were stepping into something new, something aligned, something that felt like the beginning of a chapter that you had always known was coming. And notice how often that was precisely the moment when the voices of doubt were most concentrated, most coordinated, most aggressive. That is not a coincidence. Resistance intensifies when you are moving in the right direction. The people who benefit from your smallness do not become more peaceful when you begin to expand. They become more urgent. And if you have ever felt like the pushback you received was disproportionate to the move you were making, it is because what you were moving toward was far larger than what they were willing to let you see in yourself. But they could see it clearly enough to be afraid of it. And I want to be tender about this part of the conversation because I know that some of those voices did not belong to strangers. Some of them belong to people you love, people you trusted, people who should have been the first to celebrate the fullness of what you carried. And the betrayal of that, the grief of realizing that someone who was supposed to hold your potential with care was instead quietly working to contain it, is a particular kind of pain that deserves to be acknowledged without minimization. You are allowed to grieve that. You are allowed to name it clearly for what it was. And you are also allowed in the same breath to refuse to let their fear become the final word on who you are and what you are capable of becoming. Their inability to celebrate your blueprint was never a reflection of the blueprint's worth. It was always a reflection of their own limitations. Reclaiming your identity after it has been weaponized against you is not a passive process. It requires you to do the active and often uncomfortable work of separating what is true from what was told. It requires you to go back through the narrative of your own life with new eyes, not the eyes that were shaped by the people who needed you small, but the eyes that belong to the person you have always been underneath the layers of their doubt. This means questioning conclusions that feel like facts. It means asking, who told me this about myself, and did they have my growth at heart when they said it? It means recognizing that the standards you have been measuring yourself against may have been set not to help you reach higher, but to ensure you never reached high enough to see over the wall they built around your possibilities. That kind of examination takes courage, and it takes time. And it is some of the most important work you will ever do. The reframe that I want to offer you today is one that has the potential to change everything about how you move through the world going forward. Instead of asking, am I enough to be here? I want you to start asking, who was threatened by the possibility that I might find out how enough I actually am? Because when you shift the question, you shift the power. When you stop treating the impostor phenomenon as evidence of your internal inadequacy and start treating it as a response to external interference, the entire dynamic changes. You are no longer the broken one trying to prove yourself worthy. You are the one who survived a very deliberate and sustained effort to keep you from knowing your own worth, and you are still here, still building, still becoming. That is not the story of someone who was never enough. That is the story of someone who was always too much for the rooms that tried to contain them. Your identity was the target because your identity is the asset, the thing that makes you different, the way you think, the way you see, the way you connect, the way you create, the originality of your perspective, and the depth of your insight. That is exactly what the people who tried to make you feel like an imposter were most afraid of. Not your gaps, not your learning curves, not the things you have not yet mastered, your uniqueness, your specificity, the particular and unrepeatable combination of experience, vision, and capacity that exists in you and nowhere else. That is what they saw when they looked at you, and that is what they moved to suppress. And every time you allowed their voice to become louder than your own, every time you pulled back, played smaller, second-guessed the instinct that told you to keep going, they succeeded temporarily, but you are here. which means they did not succeed permanently. So let this episode be a turning point in how you narrate your own story. Let it be the moment you decided to stop apologizing for the bigness of what you carry and start protecting it with the same energy that others have spent trying to diminish it. The imposter phenomenon was never about what you lacked. It was always about what you held, what you hold right now, in this moment, underneath every layer of doubt that someone else placed there without your permission. You have a blueprint. You have always had it. And the people who tried hardest to convince you otherwise are the greatest proof of that truth. Their fear was your confirmation. Their resistance was your direction sign. And the fact that you are still standing, still seeking, still growing in the middle of everything they threw at you that is not in spite of who you are. That is because of it. Keep building. The blueprint was never theirs to take away, and it is never too late to build exactly what you were designed to create. So take a breath, settle in, and let's begin the work of separating who you are from who you've been performing to be, because it's time to stop performing and start belonging. Welcome to the work. Welcome to the becoming. Welcome to unmasking the imposter. Thank you for listening to the Impostor Phenomenon Podcast. If today's episode opens something in you, share it with someone who needs this conversation too. Make sure you're subscribed so you never miss an episode. And if you're ready to go deeper, get ready to join our community where we're doing the real work of reclaiming identity, rewriting narratives, and rebuilding belonging from the inside out. Remember, you are not an imposter. You are not a mistake. You are the author, and your story is far from finished.